Hello everyone, I am back with the follow-up video teased in my recent review of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. In this video, I'll just be talking about the story featured in Link's latest adventure. For those who have questions about certain story elements that the game didn't exactly elaborate on, this video aims to shed some light into some of those details. Before I dive in, I can't stress how important it is to warn you of major spoilers. If for whatever reason you're not familiar with any of the story in Tears of the Kingdom, I strongly advise you stop the video right here and check out the main quests. Also, if you want to know my thoughts on the game itself, be sure to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. So I'll jump right in and talk about a point I brought up in my review, and that was the connection between Ganondorf and Calamity Ganon. I don't know about you, but I feel Nintendo went out of his way to make sure the connection between the two villains is not made obvious when playing the main story. Throughout my playthrough, I don't think I ever heard the name Ganon used to refer to Ganondorf. He was ever either called Ganondorf or the Demon King. The only time Ganon was ever used is in the name of Phantom Ganon, which is synonymous with a recurring enemy in the Zelda series created in the image of Ganondorf. One thing you might have noticed, but Ganondorf in this game doesn't have a Ganon transformation. And I know what you're thinking, but his draconified demon dragon form doesn't count because, as the game establishes, it's a transformation not exclusive to him. So where's the connection between the two villains? Well, let's rephrase the last part I mentioned. It's not that Ganondorf doesn't have a Ganon transformation, it's more that he did have one, but it separated from him in the form of Ganondorf's hatred, which manifested into malice, which in turn created Calamity Ganon. What draws me to this conclusion? Well, there's at least two details I stumbled across which may imply the idea. The first is a quote from Impa after you complete the Dragon Tears quest. When you return to Kakariko Village and talk to her, she will remind Link of the Great Calamity and says the following: "The Calamity was the Demon King of ancient times, brought back to existence in the form of hatred manifest." That pretty much ties the two Ganons together nicely, although how Impa is sure of this is a bit of a mystery. However, there is another piece of evidence that supports Impa's claim. At Hyrule Castle, I stumbled across some sort of gravestone that says the following: "Deep beneath this land, our mighty first ruler imprisoned the Demon King. To ensure the king's magic would hold, we erected a castle here to protect the sacred site. Without the castle in place, the site may be disturbed, allowing the Demon King's hatred and rage to be revived." So after Rauru imprisons Ganondorf at the imprisoning chamber, Hyrule Castle was built on top of it, so that Raru's seal would hold. Over time, however, Ganondorf's hatred grows and emanates from his body, and Hyrule Castle is weak enough for it to escape, and therefore Calamity Ganon emerges for the first time 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild. One thing that's still up in the air is whether Calamity Ganon and Ganondorf are separate entities from each other. I'd incline to believe that they are, considering their motives are different. But one thing is for certain, Calamity Ganon was created from Ganondorf in the form of his manifested hatred. Now let's talk about something that's been widely omitted from Tears of the Kingdom, that being the ancient Chica technology. Everything related to the Chica tech, like the towers, shrines, divine beasts and guardians, are all completely gone. The only remnants of the Chica tech are used in the Skyview towers, and if you go to the top of the research labs, you'll find a Chica telescope at the Akala lab, and a fossilised guardian at the top of Hatino's lab. But that's about it. Where's the rest of it? Of course, from a game development standpoint, we know the developers simply removed the assets from the game, but from a story perspective, it's quite the head scratcher. There's this idea going around that Princess Zelda ordered the Divine Beasts to be dismantled for several reasons, like they ceased functioning, which is evident by the ending of Breath of the Wild, where Zelda remarks that Vah Ruta has stopped moving. Another is because of how easy it was for Calamity Ganon to take control of them. Leaving them intact would have posed a threat to the safety of Hyrule. That seems like a plausible idea, but given the time gap between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that must have taken some commitment to dismantle them and not leave any trace whatsoever. In regards to the shrines, it's very plausible that they return to the ground whence they came from. Given how long the chasms are between the surface and the depths, I'd say it's long enough to hide the shrines without poking through the depths ceiling. But what about the towers? Because of how long they are, surely you would have stumbled across them within the depths. Well, seeing in Breath of the Wild the towers don't appear to be level with each other, and providing they are capable of retracting, their bases may be located at points above the depths. But there's one Chica Tower location in particular that suggests some of them retreat to a point even beyond the depths. If you recall the Gerudo Chica Tower in Breath of the Wild, it was located in a chasm next to Burrito Lookout. If you go to the same location in Tears of the Kingdom, it's now an access point to the depths. If you dive into the chasm and reach the bottom, you'll land in a pool of water, which lines up with the location where the Chica Tower would have been. This may suggest the tower retreated to a point underneath the pool of water. As for the Guardians, I'm guessing they were destroyed in one way or another. The fossilised ones were cleared to clean up Hyrule's landscapes, and any Guardian in working order that had been freed of Calamity Ganon's control was repurposed into the Skyview Towers. Another idea worth mentioning is that the moment Zelda is sent back to the past, it caused a time-space distortion which erased the Chica technology and made the Sky Islands and Light Shrines appear. That's plausible for a self-contained story, but for that to happen, the events of the Great Calamity in Breath of the Wild would either have to be erased or altered to compensate for the appearance of the Light Dragon and Zelda's absence. But then how does Ganondorf know Link's and Zelda's names, as well as Raru's faith in Link before Zelda travels back in time? This is why stories that involve time travel are hard to pick apart, because there's always going to be some contradictions here and there, if not carefully planned out. Unfortunately, there's no official explanation in regards to the missing Chica technology, which is very odd considering the Chica tech was a huge focus in Breath of the Wild, so whatever the reason, it's left up to interpretation for the time being, unless Nintendo comes out and explains what the deal is themselves. Another thing Nintendo didn't specify is how many years after Breath of the Wild does Tears of the Kingdom take place. From what I've seen, I'd say around 5 to 7 years. Why that long specifically? Well, certain NPCs give a rough estimate. If you remember Hudson from Breath of the Wild, you'll know he married a Gerudo named Ronson after you completed the Tarry Town side quest. Sometime before Tears of the Kingdom, they had a child called Madison, and when you meet her, she looks around 4 to 5 years old. Old enough to speak clearly at least. Then there's the companions. Sidon and Yunobu haven't changed much, but Riju and Tulin have had quite the growth spurt. Tulin looks like a young teen, and Riju doesn't seem far off from adulthood, if not already. But how am I sure that the gap between the two games isn't 5 years plus? Well, even though Link and Zelda are technically over 100 years old, and haven't aged a bit due to plot reasons in Breath of the Wild, they haven't changed much by the time Tears of the Kingdom kicks in, nor have any other recognisable NPC that isn't Zora or Goron. I have to admit, I was intrigued by the depths and how only now this massive underworld had been discovered. What significance does the depths have in terms of Hyrule's history? Sadly, there isn't much to go on other than it was a mining landmass for Zonai constructs to mine Zonite back in the day, as evidenced by the many mining facilities you see throughout the depths. I do want to suggest one thing though. Since the monsters are said to be more powerful due to them being affected with gloom, and that the effects of gloom are permanent unless Link rests at the light route, plus there are many areas that mirror the surface, I'd say the depths is this Hyrule's version of the Dark World, albeit from a more literal sense, and that it's pitch black down there. When you pick it apart, there are some tiny similarities with A Link to the Past here, in that Ganondorf is building his strength down in the depths, and once he builds his power, he will go to invade the surface. A nice little callback if nothing else. Now we're getting into deep plot points and timeline talk, which is probably an interesting or frustrating topic to talk about when it comes to the Zelda series. I want to bring up the Imprisoning War, as that's a central point to Tears of the Kingdom. Following the events of the Imprisoning War on its own is easy to follow, but if you know the history of certain Zelda elements, it does raise some interesting questions and ideas. First of all, it's the fact that the Imprisoning War takes place during the founding era of Hyrule. I thought this was interesting because I immediately thought this moment in time would have taken place years after Skyward Sword. Given the game's ending and the information in the Hyrule Historia, some things do line up. For example, the Hyrule Historia mentions that Hylians lived in Hyrule before the descendants of the goddess Hylia established the kingdom and the royal family. It's possible Sonia was the descendant responsible for the kingdom's founding. However, the more I thought about it, a lot of issues arose, most of which centre around Raru. I think it's very clear at this point that this Raru is not the same character we see in Ocarina of Time. Though the only similarities between the two are the fact that they are both the Sage of Light, the Hyrule Historia details that the original Raru built the Temple of Time to keep the Triforce and the Sacred Realm separate from Hyrule, thus became the Guardian of the Triforce. This Rauru, however, became a great leader and established the Kingdom of Hyrule with Sonia, who then sacrificed himself to seal away Ganondorf. The fact that he faced the Demon King with nothing but the Secret Stones does seem to suggest that King Rauru knows nothing about the Master Sword, which the original does, since it was the final key to the Sacred Realm. Because of these plot points, it pretty much kills my theory that Tears of the Kingdom's imprisoning war takes place years after Skyward Sword. And also, given the fact that the land doesn't change much thousands of years later into the present time of Tears of the Kingdom, it doesn't make much sense that after the imprisoning war, the events of Minish Cap unfold years later. So where does that leave the timeline placements of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? Well, Nintendo's official word on the matter is that it takes place long after the Zelda timeline, but whether it ends on the Fallen, Child or Adult timelines is up to the player's imagination. My interpretation is that on the Child timeline after Four Swords Adventures, the original Hyrule Warriors takes place, and the ramifications of Sia using the Triforce to bend time and space led to the destruction of Hyrule, and the way it was saved required using the Triforce to erase the memory of the three bound by destiny, as well as the memories of the Triforce so that evil could never misuse it again. I know technically that can't happen since Nintendo deemed Hyrule Warriors non-canon, but it does tie into the theory of the timelines converging, and Hyrule Warriors would be the perfect reasoning for that. Plus it would explain two things. One, it would explain how weapons and outfits from across all of Zelda's history could have slipped through the cracks of the repairing world, and two, it would explain why the Triforce itself is completely absent in these two games. Apart from it being used as a symbol of Hyrule, the Triforce and the Sacred Realm are never mentioned, unless they're building it up for Breath of the Wild version 3.0. So I've pretty much covered what I had to say regarding the story of the two Zelda games. However, there's one last detail I want to cover that has me baffled. This is just a reminder of major spoilers here, but what I'm referring to is the appearance of the ancient hero aspect. There are so many questions I have about the appearance of this thing. First of all, the description of the ancient hero aspect states the following. This item is said to contain the spirit of a hero who once saved Hyrule. The hero's aura will envelope the wearer. This is supposed to be the hero that saved Hyrule from the first great calamity as seen in the tapestry. If you wear the hero aspect and talk to Impa, she'll comment on how you look like the ancient hero. That's cool, I guess, but there's one thing that's bothering me, and the fact that it looks like a Zonai. The story confirmed numerous times that Rauru and Minoru were the last remaining Zonai, and since Rauru sacrificed himself and Minoru's body succumbed to the effects of gloom, it begs the question, where did this Zonai come from? But when you stop and think about it, there are some things to consider. If you look closely, this Zonai doesn't have full-on features like the big ears and the height Rauru and Minoru have. Its features lean more towards a Hylian, I think, because... is it me? Or does that look more like a Gerudo than anything else? Yeah, the red hair, the golden ornaments, and I guess to a certain extent, the green skin. Another thing to point out is the white markings. I thought I'd seen this pattern somewhere even before playing Tears of the Kingdom, but that line of thinking was wrong. Where I'd seen it was all over Queen Sonia's body. When you compare the two, especially around the arms, they are very similar to each other. Does this mean anything? That this Zonai is a descendant of Queen Sonia and Rauru? Or is it a child of said descendant who has a Gerudo mother that somehow inherited Queen Sonia's markings? Are the white markings even natural or painted on? There is no clear answer to this. There are probably a ton more story elements that I missed during my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, but these were the story points that got me rattling my brain. If there's any story info you can think of that I didn't cover, be sure to let me know in the comments below. I know my review of Tears of the Kingdom is a bit different than the rest, but I really mean it when I say the story is the most engaging thing about it. I'm willing to bet the next Zelda will continue the trend of not connecting to the previous, but I at least find it fun to connect the dots, and I'll be curious to know what they throw at us next. Thank you very much for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.